this particular issue. Obviously our witnesses, you can see the tone and tenor of what's going to be happening today here, sadly. But Mr. Taibbi, I'm going to give you a brief moment to answer some charges that were put against you here, but I also want to note that there are some who don't believe that the censorship-industrial complex exists. In fact, I think our other witness this morning on Blue Sky had said, quote, "I'm going to tell them it doesn't exist. It's a lie peddled by those who seek power and profit and a dangerous distraction from the real threats we face." I won't bring up the dissent cables that weren't allowed to be sent out of Afghanistan and a number of other things that happened in the last administration. But Mr. Taibbi, there are those who don't believe that this actually exists and is going on. Can you explain what the Election Integrity Partnership is and what its relationship to GEC is? If you can turn your mic on, please.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, thank you. The Election Integrity Partnership was an organization run out of Stanford University. It had 4 non-governmental partners. There was the Stanford Internet Observatory. There was a company called Graphica. There was the Center for an Informed Public from University of Washington. And a fourth, the Digital Forensic Research Labs of the Atlantic Council. They also partnered with the Global Engagement Center, and if I'm remembering correctly, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency at DHS. And we came across EIP when we first got access to the Twitter files, when those documents were made known to us. We didn't have any guidance at all. We didn't know what we were looking at. We just simply saw a big pile of complaints.
You uncovered it. Literally, right? And you just uncovered it. You came across this.
They just said, you can start searching, and gave us access to a search engine. We started looking at various documents. We found these complaints that would essentially be referrals from this non-governmental organization that was partnered with governmental organizations about various types of content related to the 2020 election. And these complaints would go into what was called the JIRA ticketing system, after which there would often be a recommendation to remove or de-amplify or place some kind of restriction on the account. So I would characterize the Election Integrity Partnership as a wide-scale organization designed to funnel complaints to multiple internet platforms at once.
Hey, Mr. Taibbi, I'm so sorry. I made a terrible mistake on this where I had fully missed it, caught up in the moment.
It's okay.
We needed to go and have each one of you do an opening statement for 5 minutes.
Oh, okay.
So my apologies. Yes, I have some confused colleagues up here. My apologies on that. We're going to go to those opening statements. I will then go into the questions that we have. I will take some time off of my time, but I do apologize to the folks on the panel and to my colleagues for that. All right, the committee recognizes the importance of the issues before us and is grateful that you're here today. Your full statements will be part of the record, and I ask that each of you keep your spoken remarks to 5 minutes in order to allow for those times. So, Ms. Jankowicz, if you would please take 5 minutes, and we'll have your opening statement.
Chairman Huizinga and Ranking Member Kamlager-Dove, I appreciate the invitation to speak with you today. I believe it's my patriotic duty to do so because the premise of this hearing, the so-called Censorship-Industrial Complex, is a fiction that has not only had profound impacts on my life and safety, but on our national security. More alarmingly, this fiction is itself suppressing speech and stymieing critical research that protects our country. I want to acknowledge the irony we're having this discussion as we witness an assault on the First Amendment we have not seen in decades. The Trump administration has directed far more egregious violations of our Constitution than the imagined actions of the Biden administration on which this hearing is premised. Each one is chilling, but as a Fulbright alumna, the recent arrest of Rumesia Öztürk, a Fulbright PhD student at Tufts University, especially disturbed me. The Secretary of State seemingly revoked Ms. Öztürk's visa for publishing an op-ed in Tufts campus newspaper. For using her constitutionally protected right to free speech, she was spirited away by plainclothes ICE officers in broad daylight. This is what I'm used to observing in authoritarian countries that I study. And if this had happened in a country in this subcommittee's portfolio, I think you'd issue a statement of concern. But it happened here. So yes, we do need some First Amendment protections at the State Department, but not for imagined transgressions of previous administrations. We need those protections from this administration today. In pursuing investigations and hearings on the censorship lie, Congress has punted its responsibility on national security, opting instead for political theatrics that are high on fantasy and low on facts. Congress used government resources to attack disinformation researchers, deliberately misconstruing their work, burying them with requests for documents and depositions, and stoking the fires of public rage against them. These tactics echo the dark days of McCarthyism, but with a chilling 21st century twist. Even as America faces unprecedented threats in the information space, from our adversaries' increasing capabilities to the exponential growth of emerging technologies, committees, including this one, continue to waste valuable time and taxpayer dollars targeting American citizens who are doing work in the public interest. I know this intimately. In my written testimony, I explain in detail the lies that upended my life when my appointment to lead the DHS Disinformation Governance Board was announced. As demonstrated by both the board's founding documents and my 5-hour sworn testimony before your colleagues on the Judiciary Committee, the board's mission was to protect civil rights, civil liberties, privacy, and the First Amendment, the very subject of this hearing. Many continue to lie that the board was a censorship body because it's politically useful to them. That lie was the first chapter in the tall tales about the so-called censorship-industrial complex that have since emerged. They've been buoyed by the Twitter files, which falsely allege that Twitter executives were colluding with government to censor disfavored content. The Twitter files crafted almost endless fiction based on selectively edited email and text excerpts between researchers, platforms, and federal agencies. They're riddled with errors and outright falsehoods. The allegation that researchers are somehow committing acts of censorship by conducting independent research and sharing it is outlandish, and it's harmful. Research is speech, government-funded or not. The only reason the censorship lie has been perpetuated is because it's politically and financially beneficial to those who peddle it. Actions like this hearing are a dangerous distraction from the real threats we face. My organization, the American Sunlight Project, has identified plenty of foreign interference we could be talking about today, including a pro-Russia content aggregation network pushing out 3.6 million pieces of content a year, poisoning LLM-powered chatbots. China and Iran are also actively targeting the US as we sit here. But our capacity to respond to these threats has been eviscerated based on conspiracy theories, sending a signal to our adversaries that America is weak. Beijing, Tehran, and Moscow interpret these partisan attacks on counter-disinformation work as a sign that their interference is likely to succeed. Our adversaries use information operations to undermine democratic values. We must act not only as the staunchest defender and guarantor of those values abroad, but fight just as hard to preserve them at home. Thank you.
His time has expired. Mr. Taibbi, you have 5 minutes. The aforementioned Twitter files, author, founder of Racket News. You have 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, Madam Ranking Member, thank you. My name is Matt Taibbi. I'm the editor of the independent site Racket, and I've been covering digital censorship issues since 2018, the fictional ones. On March 14th, 2016, Barack Obama signed Executive Order 13721, developing a new integrated global engagement center to support government-wide counterterrorism communications activities directed abroad. It directed the Secretary of State to create a new body, the GEC or GEC, to, quote, counter the messaging and diminish the influence of international terrorist organizations, including ISIL, Al-Qaeda, and other violent extremists abroad. 7 years later, while working on a story involving internal communications at Twitter, I found myself reading emails between GEC officials and Twitter executives about subjects ranging from COVID-19 to the 2020 election to Donald Trump. Once, Chairman, Mr. Chairman, you were right to point out that they were once focused abroad, but by this time, GEC officials were largely concerned with domestic English language accounts, people with no ties to terror groups or relationships with adversary nations like Iran, China, or Russia. When I went back this weekend through those documents to find examples of GEC pressuring Twitter to remove or de-amplify Americans accused of misinformation, I found an exchange that we Twitter Files reporters missed in 2023. A lawyer at the company asked several other executives if they had any, quote, appetite for writing GEC a letter to ask them to stop going to the media with sensationalist claims about epidemics of foreign bots. One of the company's senior communications executives gave a remarkably candid answer. From my chair, it would be very helpful, he wrote. Referencing a well-known Washington reporter, he went on, the pre-briefed Ellen Nakashima article in the Post on Bernie and this coronavirus story, no heads up, are making me worry a little about how good faith these players will be through the press into 2020. So it wasn't just conservatives, it was also Bernie Sanders. The date on that email was February 24th, 2020. 3 days after the Washington Post ran a devastating feature titled Bernie Sanders briefed by US officials that Russia is trying to help his presidential campaign. This was an extremely impactful story that opened the floodgates on a conspiracy theory that Sanders was the recipient of Russian help. It claimed bots helping Bernie online were part of, quote, Russia's broader interest in sowing division in the United States and uncertainty about the validity of American elections. In response to this odd sequel of claims about Russian bots aiding Donald Trump, the company's head of trust and safety, Yoel Roth, gave an unflattering description of GEC's methods. Quote, they use Brandwatch to monitor a handful of openly Russian accounts, for instance, RT, and an unspecified number of accounts that they baselessly assert are inauthentic. This is the exact formula we previously found behind another often used online tool called Hamilton 68, whose founders were also quoted in the Post piece. Hamilton 68 mixed a smattering of real Russian accounts with a crowd of mostly American, mostly anti-establishment accounts to create a dashboard that synthesized falsely the appearance of Russian social media backing for everything from the Devin Nunes memo to the Parkland shooting. Although many of the most controversial stories about GEC involve their funding of commercial media scoring operations that downranked conservative news outlets, the GEC also pressured Twitter about left-leaning figures like Sanders, anti-war accounts, libertarians, and independents, as well as conservatives. They managed this by using a trick that gave domestic propaganda the appearance of a counter-terrorist operation. GEC sent out reports that would first identify a few social media accounts with real ties to Russia or China or Iran. Then it would separately list accounts they called highly connective to that country's propaganda ecosystem. These would be American or European citizens with inconvenient views. For instance, GEC identified the Twitter accounts of former Italian Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte and former Italian Democratic Party Secretary Nicola Zingaretti, who was often compared to Bernie, as being highly connective to Russia. All he had to do to get on the list was retweet what they called anti-US propaganda, or GEC's subjective definition of pro-Russian propaganda. No actual connection was required. Through this means, the GEC exactly rehabilitated the fellow traveler concept used by infamous smear artists and witch hunters from history, from Leon Trotsky to the House Un-American Affairs Committee. It was a way to accuse someone who hasn't done anything wrong of guilt by ideological association. And I'll just wrap up. I'm gone over my time, but they
Gentlemen's-
weren't looking for misinformation and disinformation. They were looking for orthodoxy and unorthodoxy, obedience and disobedience. The idea behind GEC in particular was finding a way to propagandize American citizens and encourage acceptance of official policy the way we've always done to foreign populations. It's a flagrant violation of First Amendment ideals and should be eradicated from the government completely. No one should have this tool, not Democrats, not the Trump
Gentleman's
administration, nobody.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you.
Yeah. With that, Mr. Weingarten, investigative journalist and columnist, you have 5 minutes.
Chairman Huizenga, Ranking Member Kamlager-Dove, and esteemed members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify. The censorship-industrial complex poses a mortal threat to our republic. The sprawling whole-of-society regime has sought to purge unauthorized opinions and inconvenient facts en masse under guise of combating mis, dis, and malinformation. Today's hearing highlights one of the regime's most insidious manifestations: the turning of federal agencies that are supposed to target foreign adversaries instead on Americans and our core political speech. The Global Engagement Center was a key cog in such efforts through its cultivation of hundreds of ostensibly non-governmental counter-disinformation players. Two players the GEC funded and promoted were risk raters, so-called, NewsGuard and GDI. These relationships should have raised immediate alarm bells. The GEC's stated mission was to counter foreign propaganda and disinformation efforts, as the chairman noted. Yet NewsGuard aims to systematically defund sources of harmful misinformation, foreign and domestic. NewsGuard does so by rating and reviewing thousands of outlets for reliability and creating exclusion lists, that is, blacklists, to feed advertisers for use in determining where not to place ads. GDI likewise seeks to reduce disinformation by removing the financial incentive, ad revenue, it says lurks behind it. GDI too arms advertisers with a dynamic exclusion list, reportedly containing 2,000 risky publications, including, again, American ones. Perversely then, a foreign-facing interagency entity both funded and gave the federal government's imprimatur to non-governmental would-be destroyers of disfavored domestic outlets. Those outlets appear to be disfavored for ideological reasons. NewsGuard generally lavishes significantly higher scores on left-leaning sources over right-leaning ones. Its Kafka-esque correspondence with dissident outlets broadly, who have challenged seemingly unmerited scores, largely in vain, further suggests a bias. GDI's 2022 report on disinformation risk among U.S. sources betrays a similar bent. There, it lists among its 10 least risky publications 9 liberal to progressive corporate media outlets and the Wall Street Journal. Its 10 riskiest publications include 9 conservative or libertarian outlets and Real Clear Politics. Evidence suggests the risk raters' profiles grew substantially after receiving federal support. Their ubiquity in the ad marketplace reportedly drove declines of tens of millions of dollars in ad revenue annually for outlets on their de facto blacklists. Some disfavored sources report reduced traffic, diminished search visibility, and lost operational partners. Real Clear's experience with the risk raters is uniquely perverse. Real Clear Politics' bread and butter is curating compelling analysis from sources left and right, corporate and independent, on key issues of the day so readers can weigh both sides. Consequently, media bias rater All Sides positions RCP in the ideological center, alongside Reuters, The Hill, and the Wall Street Journal. Despite our pursuit of fairness and quality journalism, NewsGuard gives RCP a 62 on its 100-point scale, as determined by their journalists rating a sample of our journalists' work. NewsGuard dings us in part for our purported undisclosed conservative bent. The implication is that it either dismisses viewpoint diversity as a feature or sees it as a bug. Real Clear Investigations likewise curates deep dives and publishes original content from journalists with diverse perspectives. NewsGuard has branded us biased too, albeit while giving RCI an 80 rating. Our bias is to pursue stories competitors miss or angles competitors ignore. Shouldn't that be celebrated? As for GDI, RCP may be on its secret blacklist too. Now, Real Clear has thrived despite the risk raters' best efforts, but the censorship-industrial complex the GEC helped foster has made a tough business tougher and disadvantaged us. Our ad revenue has declined materially. We've seen a meaningful drop in certain search rankings. And we've taken a reputational hit by being branded with the digital scarlet letter R for risky. Even if the risk raters were unobjectionable, the fact remains, through funding and supporting such entities, government abridged speech by proxy. The Trump administration and its State Department have indicated these efforts are over, but the speech police have neither laid down their arms nor recanted for past abuses, suggesting they will at best lie in wait during Trump 2, only to come back with a vengeance thereafter. So the time to act is now. Congress should codify the president's first-day executive order restoring freedom of speech and ending federal censorship activities, and Congress should erect a strict firewall between the U.S. government and our body politic, a la Smith-Mundt. To overcome our adversaries, we must not emulate them by casting dissent from ruling class orthodoxy as dangerous and surveilling and silencing the dissenters. Instead, let us restore the free and open public square on which our republic rests. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, we will return to questioning. I'm going to give myself 3 minutes and eaten up some of that time in a very, unfortunately on my part. So again, my apologies to the panel for any confusion there. I was enthusiastic, yes, the ranking member reminds me. So I think it was your spirited opening that may have brought me along that path. With that, I'm going to take 3 minutes, and Mr. Taibbi, you had started to explain and did in your opening statement about the Election Integrity Partnership, and I appreciate that. Mr. Weingarten, you were talking about an advertising blacklist, and the GDI NewsGuard used these blacklists to censor American speech, and I am curious, those blacklists, how did they treat the right-leaning outlets versus the left-leaning outlets, and were outlets punished for even attempting to provide ideological balance? I mean, you wrote Real Clear Politics was one of those that was on the list.
I think the Real Clear Politics case study is instructive in that if you go to our website, you see sources left and right, and the whole purpose is let's provide a balanced diet of opinion and analysis and let the American people decide, because we have faith in the American people, that they have agency and they can decide for themselves. And the fact of the matter is that RCP and then some on the right, libertarian, conservative, and even anti-establishment leftist publications have found themselves dinged by these so-called risk raters. And that risk, by the way, is that they may be brands who advertise on these sites may be targeted for boycotts and attacks, generally by progressive groups. So this whole sort of apparatus exists out of coercion, essentially, from the left. And as a consequence, ad revenue streams have died for many of these companies, and it threatens their viability.
Yeah. And how would these blacklists treat a publication that had the audacity of suggesting that COVID-19 virus may have originated from a lab leak, which actually turned out to be a legitimate and true theory? I don't know about the rest of my colleagues or the panelists, but I know people who were canceled over putting out such theories and even threatened with their job and their livelihood on that. So talk to me a little bit very quickly about COVID-19.
In Real Clear's reporting, we saw that at least one source that put forth questions about all manner of issues from the origins of COVID to mitigation measures and beyond. They got attacked because they dissented from what was public health orthodoxy at the time. And as we know, that public health orthodoxy, that consensus has shifted. But if you differed from consensus, you were dinged, and you had essentially no recourse or real due process to get off a blacklist for just presenting an opinion or a substantiated analysis.
I'm going to move quickly here, and I know, Mr. Taibbi, you're not the only controversial person here. Ms. Jankowicz, as we talked about some of her posts, some of this saying that the fairy tale about Hunter Biden's laptop is out there, and the Chris Steele provides some great historical context about the evolution of disinformation. So without objection, I'm going to put those into the record as well. I find it ironic that something called the American Sunlight Project is actually a dark money group that won't release its donors. Certainly that doesn't bode well. Mr. Taibbi, I'm going to give you the last moment here. Can you explain exactly how GEC colluded with social media companies, specifically through the Election Integrity Partnership?
Mr. Chairman, GEC's actual relationship to the Election Integrity Partnership was not clear. It was made plain in the EIP's own website. Secretary of State Blinken mentioned that it was cooperating with the EIP when he visited Stanford. Also, there is a story that it was actually interns from the State Department who came up with the idea for the EIP. So, but they were one of the two major government organizations that was working with the EIP.
My time has expired. With that, I yield to the representative from California.
So a central claim of this hearing is that states GEC first set up under the Trump administration and championed by then Senator Marco Rubio, supported organizations that censored conservative speech and worked to discredit conservative outlets. Ms. Jankowicz, to your knowledge, has State Department funding ever gone towards suppressing domestic speech?
Thank you, Ranking Member. Mr. Taibbi said when he was first searching through the so-called Twitter files, he didn't know what he was looking at. Well, he still doesn't. Everything looks like a conspiracy when you don't know how anything works. And let me tell you, there was no censorship going on at the Global Engagement Center or the State Department. You may have heard Mr. Weingarten kind of make the inference that all of these lists GDI and NewsGuard are making, you might have thought that they were funded by the State Department. They were not. Do you know what the State Department was funding for those two organizations? Something I think the Republicans on this committee would be very interested in: tracking and countering Chinese state propaganda targeting Americans. Now, I used to manage State Department grants early in my career. I know that that is a huge fiduciary responsibility. You have to account for every single penny that you're spending on travel, on staff time, on supplies, and you have to do it multiple times a year. So for folks to sit here and say that grants dedicated to countering CCP propaganda were somehow spent on conservative blacklists is just ridiculous. And I'll also add that that is those organizations' speech to be able to do research and categorize news sites as they see fit. A letter sent to the Senate last week shows that actually a lot of conservative organizations, including the Heritage Foundation, the Wall Street Journal, Reason, Cato Institute, and the Washington Free Beacon all received great ratings by NewsGuard, while the Daily Kos only got a 45 out of 100. So this nonsense about bias is just frankly not true. And it's also rings a little bit like a restaurateur who got a bad review in the Washington Post, mad that nobody wants to eat there anymore.
So you brought up China, so let's stay there for a second. Can you give us a snapshot of the kinds of harmful information operations China and Russia wage against the United States, and maybe how this administration is dismantling our ability to protect Americans from foreign propaganda and manipulation?
Absolutely. I'd love to, Ranking Member. So the Chinese Communist Party continues to be extraordinarily active in the information space, using all manner of influence operations to target Americans, including the famous Spamouflage campaign, which is fake social media profiles masquerading as Americans, exacerbating tensions. And there are certainly plenty of those to go around right now. The fact that we're here in such a polarized, politicized setting, I'm sure there's somebody in Beijing watching this hearing thinking about what they can tweet about it, right? We have to think about that. We are doing our adversaries' work for them. And with Russia, I'd say something that we just discovered at the American Sunlight Project is that there's a large network, a growing network of a content aggregation platform that is pushing out 3.6 million pieces of pro-Russia content a year. I'm not talking about, Russia is great. I'm talking about the massacre in Bucha. It did not happen, that sort of thing, falsehoods, right? Mm-hmm. And they're doing that not to infect, to get human readership. They're doing it to infect chatbots, ChatGPT, all of these chatbots that we're now using that we're being told are going to be the next great frontier in research. And that's being shown to people who are asking questions about Russia and Ukraine. Our capacity to respond to these threats, the only office that was dedicated to looking at foreign state propaganda in the State Department, now doesn't exist anymore. And our FEME, it's organization that came after it, doesn't even have a website on the State Department. So I'm not worried, Chairman. You said, is this just a GEC by a different name? I'm not worried about that because they're not even talking about what they're doing. And our adversaries are absolutely taking notice. They think it's open season on the United States.
Another falsehood the majority witnesses have perpetuated is that Democratic government officials and lawmakers colluded with social media companies to suppress content they disagreed with. Mr. Chair, I request unanimous consent to enter into the record a Rolling Stone article titled, "Twitter Kept Entire Database of Republican Requests to Censor Posts."
Without objection.
This article describes how the Trump administration and congressional Republicans routinely asked Twitter to take down posts they objected to. In the minutes we have left, Ms. Jankowicz, what is the difference between content moderation and censorship?
The difference between content moderation and censorship is that these platforms are private platforms. They have the right to enforce their terms of service how they see fit. And Mr. Taibbi himself, cited an email from Yoel Roth in which he was throwing shade on the Gex analysis. Sounds like he wasn't listening to them, to me.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The representative from Pennsylvania is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Jankowicz, since you brought it up, have you read the Venona intercepts?
Again, sir?
Venona, are you familiar?
I'm not, sir.
You brought up McCarthy, and I just encourage you to go ahead and read through that. You might, as many people, disagree with his methods, but you can't disagree with the facts that the people that he listed turned out to all be subversive communists working in our government. With that, I'll turn to Mr. Weingarten. Your statement notes that GEC's $100 million in grants since 2016 funded 400 plus projects, including NewsGuard and GDI, which blacklisted 2,000 U.S. outlets, costing $128 million in ad revenue by 2022. Do you have any other concrete, well, before we get into the other concrete examples, because we got a difference of opinion on both sides of the dais here. You said 2,000 U.S. outlets. Are those U.S. outlets Chinese? Maybe they are, so I'm just asking. Are they owned by the Communist Party of China, Iran, Russia, or are they U.S. information purveyors?
As a factual matter, to my knowledge, none of those are foreign-owned publications, and certainly not by our adversaries.
So this is 2,000 U.S. outlets, $100 million in grants. Where do you suspect that grant money came from?
Well, the grant money came from taxpayers.
Oh, my goodness, really? Taxpayers paying $100 million to blacklist 2,000 U.S. outlets. Is that fiction? I've heard it's fiction. Is it fiction or not fiction?
It's not fiction. And let me be clear. The 2,000 is the total list. I'm not sure if it's all U.S., but certainly a substantial percentage of them.
Okay. Is that a conspiracy theory?
No, sir.
I didn't think so. Can you give us any concrete examples? Because $100 million in grants, 2,000 U.S. outlets costing $128 million by your account in ad revenue. Can you give us any concrete examples how the GEC funding directly hit American outlets' speech or revenue, other than the ones you already have?
Was the lawsuit against the State Department from the Federalist and Daily Wire indicates their businesses the viability was dramatically damaged after GDI and NewsGuard ended up targeting them. And it's obvious why, because if all of the advertisers say, don't put your ads on our websites, it saps a revenue stream. And let's also note, by the way, that beyond NewsGuard and GDI, there was funding for dozens of other organizations that were involved in things like misdis and malinformation detection and such. And all of this was fueling an ecosystem that existed ultimately to clamp down on speech, whether from individuals or outlets. And that's U.S. tax dollars ultimately funding the silencing of ourselves, and that's un-American.
Yeah, U.S. tax dollars through grant programs to create a censorship empire on American citizens under the guise of this global engagement center, which was meant to, look, I agree with Ms. Jankowicz. We want to be dealing with China, Russia, Iran, foreign adversaries, but that's not what this was. Mr. Taibbi, your Twitter files analyzed 3.8 billion U.S. tweets, and the metrics exposed GEC's ties to the Election Integrity Project, which flagged 22 million election posts in 2020. Can you highlight the information you found that exposes GEC's efforts to push platforms to censor Americans, and how many accounts were affected?
Certainly, first I'd like to respond to something that Ms. Jankowicz said.
Feel free.
She mentioned that Yoel Roth, who is the head of trust and safety at Twitter, threw some shade at GEC. And indeed, that was actually a chief narrative that we found in the Twitter files, which was that Twitter's chief content moderation officers had too many government officials trying to call them on the phone, and they did not want to add another group, particularly one that they felt was incompetent and didn't understand what they were doing, to the trust tree. Ultimately, however, after a year of very fevered interactions within the company, they were forced to allow GEC into their weekly or monthly discussions with the government, what they called the industry meetings. And there is an email that we found in the Twitter files from a former CIA officer who went to work at Twitter, who was explaining that there was once a time when Twitter would have been able to say no to that kind of request, but our window on that is closing.
Thank you, sir. My time has expired. I yield.
Gentleman's time has expired. With that, the representative from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been in Congress for a while now, so I was in Congress during the time that the Global Engagement Center was formed, and part of the rationale for forming it, and you mentioned it in your opening statement, Mr. Taibbi, to counter the messaging and diminish the influence of international terrorist organizations, including ISIL, Al-Qaeda, and other violent extremists. And the reason it was created was we saw how effective ISIL or ISIS was at recruiting folks, using their messaging, using the internet, the threat that it was to our homeland in terms of creating homegrown threats as well. And we saw some domestic terror attacks. So just a yes/no question. Outside of what it may or may not have morphed into, we still need a tool like that. Would you agree with that, Mr. Weingarten? To counter that messaging?
I believe we should use every means to counter our adversaries lawfully.
And that would include China and Russia. Same thing, Mr. Taibbi, that we do need an effective tool to counter messaging, recruitment, terrorism, domestic terrorism. Whether that's the GEC or not, we do need to be able to counter misinformation, disinformation.
I don't think that's a yes or no answer, Mr. Congressman. For instance, we talk about counterterrorism with Anwar al-Awlaki. Was it appropriate for the United States to assassinate a foreign citizen without due process, even an American citizen? In this case, what became the GEC started off as a counterterrorism program, but it was, as was explained to me, excuse me, sir, by a former GEC employee.
So again, maybe there was mission
switch
creep
from
or not
CT
mission
to
creep. We still
CT,
need some
counterterrorism to
mechanism by which to,
counterpopulism.
Ms. Jankowicz?
Absolutely. This should be a bipartisan issue, and it's crazy that you even have to ask the question, Congressman.
Right. Ms. Jankowicz, is this threat going to get worse with the evolution of AI?
Oh, absolutely. We are seeing this threat get worse with the evolution of AI already, not just the poisoning or grooming of LLM chatbots like I've already mentioned, but there's evidence from OpenAI and their threat team that China is using AI models in order to more effectively translate Chinese propaganda from Chinese into English and other languages as well.
So this shouldn't be a partisan issue. I mean, when we get sworn into Congress, our most important duty is to protect our homeland, protect against domestic risk. And with the advent of internet, social media, now AI, information and misinformation, radicalization, self-radicalization, those are going to be hugely important issues. And how we do that within protecting First Amendment rights is not going to be very easy. And again, I would urge Democrats and Republicans in a nonpartisan way to protect our homeland, to try to figure this out, inviting in the private sector as well, inviting in those social media companies to try to get this right. I don't disagree that we saw a lot of politicization around COVID. I'm a doctor, and I'm agnostic on COVID origins. I can make the case that it was a lab leak. I can make the case that it was And that's legitimate debate, and we shouldn't censor any of that debate. We should have that debate. Obviously, it was a novel virus. We're still fighting those fights, and I think it's counterproductive for us as a nation and us as an institution in Congress. I think we do have to put that aside because these threats are very real, and I do worry about what's going to happen with AI. Ms. Jankowicz, in the final minute that I have, what would your recommendations be, taking politics out of this and how we would structure something?
It's really interesting, Congressman, because a lot of the functionalities that you've just described, coordination within the government, following these threats, making sure that we're abreast of them, coordinating with industry, that was the job that I was brought in to do at the Disinformation Governance Board in DHS, despite it being widely lied about. So I think we do need some sort of coordinating function. And if Congress is concerned about the way that, social media companies are moderating and implementing their policies, the solution is not to bandy about conspiracy theories. It's to pass some oversight and transparency regulation, which I think we've been a little bit late on here in the United States. I would love to see that happen.
Great. So I would hope, if we are going to do a State Department authorization bill, that we as Democrats and Republicans on this subcommittee would actually take a thoughtful approach, invite folks in. Maybe if we get it done under a Republican administration, we can take some of the politics out of it. But let's do our job. This is about protecting our country. This is about protecting our influence around the world and fighting against our adversaries. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The representative from Texas, Mr. Self, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You really have to admire the opposition here diverting our attention from the issue at hand to the current days, because we are trying to do oversight on the Biden administration that did do the work of our adversaries for 4 years and ruined our credibility around the world. So, given your recent testimony, Ms. Jankowicz, and you were in the government. So,
For 11 weeks.
So should the government have a part in enforcing free speech, law enforcement? Should the government have some role in it?
Congressman, I believe the First Amendment is sacrosanct. I am the granddaughter of a man that was in a gulag, deported to a gulag by the Soviet Union. So I am pretty intimate with these things, and they're a part of my bread and butter. I don't think that we should be arresting people for exercising their speech, and I think that's something that you all should be exercising your oversight over.
So on April the 16th, 2022, you said we need platforms to do more, and we frankly need law enforcement and our legislatures to do more as well. So if we move past that to the right of the state, the mission of the state to form public opinion, where would you stand on that, given your role in what you've been involved in?
Thank you, Congressman. I believe that quote, judging by the time frame, was about responses to online harms, which I'm happy to talk about here today, not the subject of the hearing, but a lot of people, for expressing their First Amendment protected speech online, deal with threats. I've dealt with them myself. My family and I were doxxed. We were threatened. I was advised to leave my home. And you know what? That's why I was talking about law enforcement, Congressman.
But that is a quote from you.
Yes, talking about online harms and threats against people online for exercising their speech.
Because I have a limited time.
Sure.
Please answer my next question.
Your next question is?
The one that I've already given you. You haven't addressed it yet.
Please repeat it, sir.
What is the mission of the state, the right of the state to form public opinion? Because we're talking about our government has been involved in doing that for the last few years.
In my opinion, the government has a First Amendment right to free speech as well, and SCOTUS has just affirmed that with a case last June. We just heard a case that came in federal court in New York that actually showed that NewsGuard was not acting as an envoy of the state as well.
So what is the role of the government?
The role of the government can express its free speech, right? And citizens have a right to their free speech as well. I don't really understand your question, sir. I'm not sure the point.
I'm asking you, what is the role of government in public opinion? Because we're talking about actions here that have tried to form public opinion on the Hunter laptop, on the Russia disinformation, all of that. I'm asking you, what is the role of government in that matter?
Absolutely, Congressman. So the government is allowed to express its own opinions, its viewpoints, as we're seeing this administration do,
But
as
when
we
it
saw
is
the previous
absolutely
administration do.
wrong, what is their role when it is absolutely wrong? The Hunter laptop is probably the best example we could roll out here.
I actually disagree with that, because when Twitter decided to add friction to the Hunter Biden laptop case, it actually got more views. You've also heard Mr. Taibbi talk about, 22 million tweets, millions of things censored through the GEC to the Election Integrity Partnership. You know how many emails went between the GEC and the EIP? 15. You can look it up in Chairman Jordan's documents that he released at the end of last year. 15 emails. I've sent more text messages to my husband about our toddler's potty training in the last week than emails went from the GEC to the EIP. And those were all about overt Russian propaganda, RT and Sputnik, except for one, when the GEC analyst said to the folks there, I can't comment on this one because I'm a government employee, but I think you should check it out. That's all that happened, sir.
So I'm going to leave you, and I'll yield back a little bit of my time. A direct quote from Joseph Goebbels. It is the absolute right of the state to supervise the formation of public opinion, and I think that may be what we're discussing here, and yield back.
Gentleman yields back. With that, the representative from Texas, Ms. Johnson, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I want to respond to what my colleague from Texas just said. When you're quoting Joseph Goebbels about the role of state in the public debate, we have a big problem. Isn't that right, Ms. Jankowicz? I mean, that's alarming as hell to me when that becomes the gold standard of Hitler and all that was going on in Russia, in German atrocities during World War II, when that becomes the quote of this hearing. I also want to respond to another comment where it said that Biden ruined our credibility around the world. I would argue that Mr. Trump is doing that right now, canceling USAID contracts, breaching our promises and our agreements to our friends and allies across the world, making our country less safe. That is why we find us in this role. I'm really disappointed that we're devoting this first hearing to a conspiracy theory that the State Department, out of some larger, sinister motive, routinely censors free speech. Today's Republican hot topic roulette has us talking about an agency that the Republicans let this Congress expire. It's my understanding that the GEC's mandate is to address foreign propaganda, misinformation, and disinformation. Ms. Jankowicz, I would think that that would be a fundamental priority for the United States, that we should not want our adversaries putting misinformation into our public discord in order to adversely affect elections and other things. Wouldn't you agree?
I would absolutely agree. And, I'll note also that the GEC was created through a bipartisan bill, the Portman-Murphy counter-disinformation bill. And many of the actions that have been referenced so far in this hearing took place under the Trump administration, under a Trump appointee, Leah Gabriel, who was an intelligence analyst, a fighter pilot, and a former Fox News host as well.
Right. Exactly. I think that this whole notion that we want to try to regulate the speech of people in our country and online social media companies. Did I understand your testimony correctly that you do believe that private businesses have a right to regulate the content on their platform?
Absolutely. We sign up to terms of service when we share our cat pictures or our kid pictures or whatever it is that my co-witnesses share online. We sign up to those terms of service. And sometimes those terms of service say things like, you can't share terrorist content. You can't share child sexual abuse material. And if we decide it, you can't share what we deem disinformation also. And we being the social media platforms there.
Right. And they have a right to do that. But what's genesis this problem is that so many on the far right just made shit up in the electoral context, put stuff out there, and then the social media platform said, we're not going to tolerate just blatant lies, blatant falsehoods on our platforms. There has to be some basis of reality. And now the Republicans are pushing back because they got their hand in the cookie jar on that, right?
Well, the scientific research from universities like New York, Indiana University, and Yale all points to the fact that Republicans share more content that is more likely to be moderated. It's not that they're being censored, it is that they're breaking the rules that they can read if they read the fine print.
Right. Thank you so much for your testimony today. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back, and the chair will remind people to direct their comments, especially curse words, at the chair rather than at our witnesses. So,
Mr. Chair?
Yes, ma'am.
Given the fact that we just heard a quote from Joseph Goebbels, chief propagandist for the Nazi Party, I request unanimous consent to enter into the record my letter urging Secretary Rubio to fire Darren Beattie for his dangerous anti-American pro-CCP white nationalist ideology.
Without objection.
Thank you.
I will note that I believe Mr. Self's comment and quote was his assertion that this government has been doing that and following, or the last administration. So not as a admiration, but as a rebuke. So with that, the congressman from Indiana, Mr. Shreve, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the witnesses for this very interesting hearing. This is my first subcommittee hearing on free speech, not my fifth. And I don't come to the table having this all figured out. And part of these hearings is an opportunity to listen, learn, to ask questions. And I appreciate this opportunity. We agree broadly, both sides of the aisle, that the First Amendment is a cornerstone of our democracy, that censorship runs contrary to the first, that when it's wielded by private individual or groups, it's inappropriate. When a government entity is tasked with upholding the Constitution and may in some fashion weaponize censorship, it's a problem. The GEC played a role in facilitating censorship and protected speech by Americans prior to its authority sunsetting at the end of this past year. An example, under investigations of the GEC's involvement in suppressing dissenting voices in the lead up to the 2020 election. We've established that. Mr. Taibbi noted that it was established under EO by Mr. Obama. Its mission was to counter the messaging and reduce the influence of international terrorist organizations. Its scope expanded, countering foreign state and non-state propaganda and disinformation efforts. Leading up to the 2020 election, some within the GEC exploited its mission to target our American citizens rather than foreign threats. These efforts were part of the GEC's collaboration with the Election Integrity Project, a consortium of academic, named a few, and think tanks formed shortly prior to that election. The IAP's stated goal was to monitor and correct election-related misinformation and disinformation originating from the United States. Leading up to that election, the IAP would contact social media companies identifying specific posts that some within the organization believed spread election misinformation. These posts were then removed from those platforms. And after the 2020 election, IAP officials acknowledged that the GEC had reported such cases to them and was one of the most frequently tagged organizations in the IAP's system, their software system. The GEC's mission creep from countering international terrorist organizations to censoring the voices of our citizens before a presidential election is a problem. My question for Mr. Taibbi, as part of your Twitter files investigation, you uncovered that the GEC had provided over 5,000 account names to Twitter, stating that they were Chinese accounts engaged in state-backed coordinated manipulation. How long did it take you to find out that this was not the case?
Thank you, Mr. Congressman. We rather quickly found that there was a heated discussion within Twitter about the so-called China list. First of all, what GEC did was actually par for the course. They didn't contact Twitter first when they made up that list. They went straight to the media, which is why you will find numerous stories about an enormous quantity of Chinese misinformation agents that came out in March, roughly late February and March of 2020. When Twitter did an analysis of those names, they quickly discovered that a lot of them were not, in fact, Chinese misinformation agents. There were even 3 employees of CNN, if I remember correctly, that were on the list. And there was a heated back and forth between GEC and Twitter about that issue. And in fact, that was one of the reasons why the Trust and Safety Department did not want to allow GEC to participate in its regular industry meetings with other platforms. So that was a big issue.
Mr. Chairman, yield my last 15 seconds.
Gentleman yields back. With that, the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Mfume, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. To you and the ranking member, I want to also thank and welcome our witnesses for appearing here today. Mr. Chairman, I have to admit that I'm quite disappointed that we're using the first hearing of this subcommittee to talk about conspiracy theories alleging that the U.S. government was targeting conservative media outlets and their free speech. In fact, I find the hearing particularly ironic given the distinct lack of interest in the First Amendment displayed by the current administration in much more serious ways. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle, I don't think, are in a real position to allege free speech violations when the leader of their party has decided unilaterally to revoke the privileges of the Associated Press from the White House briefing room. And that's simply because that outlet did not cite Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America. That is sort of hypocritical, to say the least. Far worse than that, the mass deportation of foreign students that have expressed their First Amendment freedom speech find themselves also in that unfortunate position. And you don't even have to be a student or a foreign national or someone visiting. You can just be in the wrong party at the wrong time in the wrong place, and you somehow or another are deemed to be anti-American. So I have real concerns about the allegations raised in this hearing because they lack any real basis. So let's start with some of the facts, which are always tricky little things. First of all, first and false allegations against the State Department's effort to fight misinformation and disinformation really has a real impact on our national security and our ability to counteract, malign, influence, disrupt campaigns from our adversaries. We really don't have the time, quite frankly, to entertain conspiracy theorists who are oftentimes our domestic adversaries, when we should, I think, be focused more on combating the real threat to our foreign adversaries and the threats that they pose every day. Ms. Jankowicz, could you take a couple of minutes and give us a brief listing of the misinformation campaigns that have been carried out by foreign countries against Americans in the past few years?
Absolutely, Congressman. I'd be happy to. So at the American Sunlight Project, we've identified a couple campaigns, which I've talked about earlier. The one that is targeting chatbots, I've already mentioned. We also identified what we call the Sleeper Agent Network. This is a network of over 1,100 accounts on X, some of which have existed for over a decade to 15 years. They are automated accounts. They are AI-enabled, so masquerading as citizens, often with AI-generated profile pictures. And these accounts repeatedly retweet overt Russian propaganda within 60 seconds of it being posted. They have generated over 100 million tweets over their lifetime. And the only reason we have access to this data is because we used a data set that was available to the public before Elon Musk turned off our ability to research Twitter without paying him $40,000 a month.
Why would he do that?
Yeah, I think Mr. Musk doesn't like having scrutiny of his platform. You know, he had an avowed interest in getting rid of bots bots on the platform. We found some that had existed for over a decade and were clearly overt propaganda. When this story ran in Agence France-Presse, AFP, Mr. Musk did not take those bots down. That's just one example. We've also looked at a network that is targeting left-leaning environmental groups at a mass scale. Of course, there are lots of instances of Chinese and Iranian propaganda as well. Iran very famously hacked the Trump campaign ahead of the election last year. So this is a continuous threat that we need to be coordinating at all cylinders at once on, because our adversaries are certainly doing.
This is more of a threat than the Associated Press, I take it. Is that correct to assume?
I would say so,
And would it be
Congressman.
more of a threat than a student that happens to be at a university that has a position that the president does not like?
Certainly more of a threat than a student publishing an op-ed in a campus newspaper,
Yeah,
yes.
so that when I talked about hypocrisy, I don't mind having a debate. We can debate anytime, any day, anywhere. But in that debate, we've got to be equal. We've got to have some semblance of fairness. In other words, if it's good for the goose, it ought to be still good for the gander. But we've gotten into this slot, this slice of a slot, where we just point, and hurl accusations. So I hope that as we move forward, the committee will spend a great deal more time focusing on the real issues and give us an opportunity to deal with those things in South and Central Asia and in that region that are just as much of a threat. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Kane, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here today. Mr. Weingarten and Mr. Taibbi, what is the clearest evidence that each of you can cite to show that the censorship-industrial complex was an attack on the First Amendment by the Biden administration?
The discovery in Missouri v. Biden, which has been dismissed here, both at the district court level, Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals level, and among 3 Supreme Court justices, showed massive pressure from the federal government for social media companies to censor American speech, whether it's the Hunter Biden laptop story, COVID-19, election integrity matters, or beyond. District court judge said this was arguably the most massive attack on free speech in U.S. history. Again, Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals had that same view. 3 Supreme Court justices did as well. And while it's been dismissed, that case, the fact of the matter is that the Supreme Court specifically did not rule on the underlying merits, the thousands of pages of discovery, which blew the lid open on this entire regime.
Thank you. Mr. Taibbi?
Thank you, Mr. Congressman. I would do 2 quickly. There's another case after Murphy v. Missouri involving former New York Times reporter Alex Berenson v. Biden, who was removed from Twitter after repeated pressure from White House officials for a tweet that was true. He said that the COVID vaccine does not stop infection or transmission, and for that tweet, he was summarily removed from the platform after pressure from White House officials. The other one was an instance in which a friend of mine, Aaron Mate, who is no Republican, the Ukrainian Secret Services passed on a request to the FBI to have him removed from Twitter, and the FBI did it. They passed that request on to Twitter, and we found that ask in Twitter's files.
Thank you. Mr. Taibbi and Mr. Weingarten, can you please explain how the Global Engagement Center and the federal government as a whole use coercive power to censor Americans?
Well, Mr. Congressman, first of all, I would say that the Global Engagement Center and this entire effort is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of the American system and the First Amendment. The American government has no role in protecting citizens from speech. The whole idea of the system that was designed by Jefferson and Madison is that the American people view each other as adults who are capable of sorting out the truth for themselves. They do not need a nanny state or a guardian or a law enforcement agency to decide for them what's true. We don't need a truth squad. And that's exactly what GEC was designed for. It was designed to suppress any information that countered national policy and to identify people who may have had opinions that were controversial or unwanted as foreign inspired, when in fact they had no connection whatsoever to foreign governments, which is both slanderous and detrimental to the First Amendment.
Thank you. Mr. Weingarten?
I would simply say that when the government comes to you, pressures you directly using the bully pulpit, the government has its awesome resources, obviously, in terms of its funding streams, its regulatory powers when it comes to the social media companies specifically, Section 230, antitrust enforcement, et cetera. When the government comes to you and says, please take down this American speech, we'd really like you to do so. Or in the case of some in the Biden administration, actually browbeats people, curses them out, and a president goes on camera and says, your social media platform is killing people. The government does so with the most awesome power possible. Government, at the end of the day, ultimately is force, and that force should not be turned on Americans and our speech.
Thank you to all of our witnesses. I yield back my time.
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes, I yield back my time.
As Vice Chair of the Financial Services Committee, I can tell you, Mr. Weingarten, you are hitting on the exact thing that regulators do repeatedly. You can go and do whatever you want, but here's what we would like you to see you do. And it's that threat, it's that cudgel that they have that's over those that they are making the, quote, request to, that compels them to follow the government request. So with that, I yield back to the gentleman from New Jersey, and time has expired. So with that, Representative Jayapal is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is the height of hypocrisy for Republicans to hold a hearing on the so-called Censorship-Industrial Complex and the need to, quote, First Amendment safeguards at the State Department, when President Trump and Elon Musk are launching the largest attack on free speech in America in decades. Let's be clear, the administration is right now stripping people of the constitutional protection to free speech, to the right to dissent, to express their views if they're counter to Trump and Musk, to use Cold War era statutes and ignore judicial rulings, all to suit their purpose of squashing fundamental American freedoms. And they have said they are bending institutions to their will. The Trump administration is using that awesome power of government that was just spoken about, of the federal government, to intimidate and neuter any opposition from the legal establishment, academia, prominent cultural institutions, the media, the judiciary. Essentially, they want to strip your American freedoms for their right to have absolute power. Instead of focusing on the fabricated censorship of conservatives, let's talk about real threats to free speech. This month, Secretary Rubio launched, quote, Catch and Revoke, a horrifying program fueled by AI to monitor student visa holders' social media accounts for pro-Palestinian views and mark them for deportation, saying, quote, every time I find one of these lunatics, I take away their visas. Like many Americans, I have watched in horror as students with legal status, legal permanent residence, have been detained for exercising their right to free speech, like Mahmoud Khalil, who was snatched from his home in front of his pregnant U.S. citizen wife. This is the playbook of authoritarians and dictators, and no matter how you feel about this issue, we should all be horrified by this violation of free speech protections. Ms. Jankowicz, to clarify for my Republican colleagues, just a yes or no is fine, is it true that the Constitution guarantees lawful permanent residents the right to free speech?
Yes, ma'am, it's true.
And is it true that engaging in peaceful protests is protected by the First Amendment?
That's right, Congresswoman.
The Trump administration is relying on Cold War-era language in the Immigration and Nationality Act to strip students of green cards by claiming that their speech has somehow had ambiguous, quote, foreign policy consequences for the United States. This law has been on the books since 1952, and to my knowledge, it has never been used in this way. Since then, we've seen students exercise their right to protest against the Vietnam War, for the Civil Rights Movement, against apartheid. Ms. Jankowicz, is there anything that makes this moment substantively different than other protests that we've seen on campuses when the authority has not been used?
No, ma'am, it does not. And in fact, there's Supreme Court precedent that extends First Amendment rights to legal residents of the United States that I think was passed decided in 1953.
And in addition to weaponizing the immigration system to silence protected free speech, reports indicate that the Trump administration is planning to block colleges from accepting any foreign students if the school is deemed to, quote, pro-Hamas simply for allowing legal protest and freedom of expression on their grounds. As an expert that you are on authoritarian regimes, how do these attacks on higher education mirror the repression that you have observed by authoritarian dictators? And why should all Americans be concerned about this?
Thank you for the question, Congresswoman. This is exactly the sort of thing that I've observed when I was studying in Russia. I'm now banned from going to Russia. When you look at the Hungarian regime, an authoritarian regime, which has also cracked down on dissent, it's closed universities. Belarus also closed a university that was, somewhere where dissidents and civil society figures studied. The right to free speech is the right to free speech, no matter if people are expressing opinions you don't like or not. That right extends to legal residents, and I certainly hope it extends to the folks we are inviting here, Fulbright students and others, to come study in our country, to understand our values. How can we project those values if we're turning them on their heads and arresting people for using them themselves?
And what happens when a president, an executive, uses his or her authority to literally destroy all of the institutions that are supposed to be checks and balances on total power? What effect does that have on U.S. citizens who may not be legal permanent residents, or obviously not legal permanent residents, or not visa holders? What effect does that have on the regular American that's out there listening?
Congresswoman, I think there's a chilling effect. I myself have spoken with people, students, people of color, women who are now afraid to speak up and voice their opinions online and off because of what's happening on campuses today.
This is a slippery slope, and we all should be calling it out. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentlelady's time has expired. With that, the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Baumgartner, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to all assembled for this important hearing. I think at the core interest here is trust with the American people. There are real issues with terrorists using propaganda and social media to spread their nefarious aims. But what we've seen happen in the last, particularly in the last 4 years, has very much eroded the trust of the American people with the use of big government to censor dissent and truth here in the United States. So to start, Ms. Jankowicz, your organization, the American Sunlight Project, claims to have a commitment to transparency and apparently does not extend to disclosing its donors. Has the American Sunlight Project received funding either directly or indirectly from the George Soros or his foundations, including the Open Society Foundation?
Thank you, Congressman. I've received a lot of threats for speaking out. And so I've decided that we are going to abide by the rules that other 501c4s in our country abide by. And we are not required to disclose our donors, small or large, because I frankly don't want them to be threatened the way that I have been.
So sunlight for other people, but not for your donors.
If you're interested in more sunlight, I welcome you to introduce some legislation to overturn Citizens United, sir.
So, this year, in the past year, the American people knew there was something wrong with President Biden in the White House. They could see it before their very eyes. When White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre said that videos of President Biden looking lost or being disoriented and senile were disinformation and cheap fakes, should the government flag those videos for social media companies or have those videos taken down?
Congressman, I actually don't believe that the government should flag those videos or have those videos taken down. Thanks for the ability to correct the record on this idea that I'm some sort of, disinformation czar, as the chair referred to me as.
Should taxpayer-funded organizations have flagged those videos for social medias to take them down?
Taxpayer-funded organizations have a right to free speech. If they want to talk about their research and flag those videos, that's in their right to free speech, sure.
But you do acknowledge that there was a loss of trust of the American people when you had the White House press secretary calling them cheap fakes, and the American people could see between their very eyes that President Biden was disoriented.
Sir, I think in those cases there were nefarious editing techniques being used to make the effect seem worse than it actually was. And actually, I've talked to a lot of American citizens who are really disturbed about the propaganda coming out of the White House today. So I think we should focus on that in this hearing. It should be a bipartisan interest.
But do you acknowledge that there was a change in tone after President Biden's disastrous debate performance, almost as if there was an organized campaign?
Congressman, I'm interested in the threats facing our country today, not what happened last, what was it even, September, June? I can't remember.
But again, this gets to the very root interest here, which is you have U.S. government officials in a coordinated fashion working with the media to accelerate a narrative to the benefit of one political party, and it destroys trust in the American people to have folks be able to fight terrorism. I mean, if we don't have trust and transparency and understanding of this core issue, then how can we get after the terrorists?
Well, I would agree with that, sir. And I think that if you're interested in trust and transparency, again, it is the duty of Congress to pass regulations of the social media platforms that would enable that. I would love to have my hands on some more data from the social media platforms so we can talk about the facts of what's going on instead of the cherry-picked emails that Mr. Taibbi and Mr. Weingarten have been, referencing throughout this hearing. Also, I think it's a great time to bring up the Supreme Court case that was referenced earlier. I think Mr. Weingarten said that the justices didn't rule on the facts. Actually, Amy Coney Barrett wrote, "The plaintiff cannot rest on mere allegations, but must instead point to factual evidence." The plaintiffs didn't find factual evidence of government coercion or censorship in the Murthy v. Missouri case, sir.
Do you believe that the 51 former intelligence officials who said that the Hunter Biden's laptop were a product of Russian disinformation, do you think they impacted the trust of the American people and the intelligence establishment to successfully use social media to go after terrorists?
Sir, does free speech only apply when you like what's being said? Those guys were exercising their right to free speech, and actually what they said was that it bore the hallmarks of a disinformation campaign, which based on the evidence at the time was true.
And I'd just like to give you one more opportunity to disclose the donors that fund you.
I'd like to give you another opportunity to overturn Citizens United, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Gentleman yields back. With that, I would like to thank the witnesses for their testimony today and the members for their questions. Members of the subcommittee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we ask that you respond to those in writing in a timely manner pursuant to committee rules. All members may have 5 days to submit questions, extraneous materials, and statements for the record, subject to the length limitations. And without objection, the committee stands adjourned.